Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome back. I'm just going to say this one time. Thank you. I was on a jury about 8 years ago, criminal case, and I know what it takes. But when you all received your jury summons, you got that email and you went, ugh, like you all do every year. You had no idea the importance of the case you would be sitting on. Because this case has everything to do with Todd McNair and everything to do with every coach in America that should be treated fairly by the NCAA. Football is a game, but a man's occupation and a man's career is not. The NCAA sets out all the rules for all the college sports that we all love so much. I know I love them. And the players are required to follow the rules. And if that football cleat is just touching the white line and they look at it 60 times on replay, if it is, you got to bounce. The same people who push all these rules violated their own in the way they handled Todd McNair, based on a recklessly constructed record with inadequate evidence to justify what they did. Or as Eleanor Myers put it the other day, well, look, we worked with what we had. That's not good enough. Based on a recklessly constructed record, they changed the evidence when they wrote their report, and we still don't know who wrote the report and who wrote those sentences that changed the evidence. We still don't know. And they did it because they wanted to increase the penalties against USC. They did it because they could bring some sanctions against USC based on failure to properly monitor the situation. But if they could only find that an employee of USC knew what was going on and didn't report it, let alone one of the top coaches at USC knew it and didn't report it, then they could take those 6 scholarships and 1 postseason ban and fire it up to 30 scholarships over 3 years and 2 postseason bans. Unlike other universities, USC stood by Todd McNair because they knew Todd McNair, like you know Todd McNair now, because you got a good taste of this fine man for 2 days on the witness stand. You were just able to get right up and almost touch him. USC knew this man, and they believed him because they knew him, and they stood by him. Other schools had thrown that little assistant coach, not the head coaches, but that assistant coach under the bus, right? Not USC, because they knew who Todd McNair was. It was the NCAA that threw Todd McNair under the bus as they were driving toward hitting USC with the biggest sanctions they could, because they were under pressure from the press and because they felt that they had developed a reputation that they were going too soft on the big programs. And with everything that we saw from could you believe the NCAA witnesses and how they tried to avoid what was right there in the emails? Trying to say, no, Roscoe Howard didn't talk in the meetings, and no, Shep Cooper didn't influence anybody, and no, this was all hunky-dory the way this was done, and it wasn't. They, on the witness stand, tried to change the evidence the way it was that we see in the emails and documents. They tried to change the evidence in this courtroom with their words, just like they changed the evidence in 2010 to try to say that Lloyd Blake said something which he didn't. And it's cost this man big time. The NCAA, by changing the evidence to suit its purposes of getting to USC big time, changed the course of a career and took this man off the football field for the first time since he was 7 years old. Strong words to follow. You remember that there's an enforcement staff. Even though they tried to deny it, one of the witnesses admitted that they're sort of like the police and the prosecutor all rolled in one. The enforcement staff never should have brought these charges because they blew and botched their interviews. Then they bring the charges and it goes to the Committee on Infractions. The Committee on Infractions can't make a decision about this because the evidence is so weak and conflicted and they can't put it together. They can't make it work with the phone records and the statements and who said what when. They can't make it work. So they change the evidence and they write it the way they wanted it to be. Y'all have seen that. And then, having done that to him, it goes to the Infractions Appeals Committee, and Mr. Thompson again. Mr. Thompson, who has stood by Todd McNair this whole time, as Todd McNair is trying to clear his name and get off of his back what they said about him and his integrity. Scott Thompson told the COI the problems with the evidence, then told the Infractions Appeals Committee how they had made up part of the evidence to suit their purposes, and just like a rubber stamp, you heard that testimony yesterday, it was like, boom. You know, one of the reasons the entire sports world in America is watching this case and watching the decision you're going to make is they want to know whether what the NCAA did here is okay. They want to know whether violating the bylaws that they've all agreed to is okay. By the way, what tells you everything is that between the time that the Infractions Committee issued its report, you remember that date, June 10, 2010, and by June 30, USC, that stood by him all the way, just could not renew his contract. And then the Infractions Appeals Committee decision was in April of the following year. In between, in December, the president of the NCAA, Mark Emmert, did a press conference and said the COI got it right. So the president of the organization, number one, it's called ratification. He ratified, he approved what had been done. And what do you think the influence was on the Infractions Appeals Committee that months before they made the decision on whether this appeal should be overturned or limited in some way? The president of the organization is announcing everything was done right. So let's go back to one of the earliest points we made. Let me have your eyes back a second here. I see you all reading already. No? Okay. One of the early foundations we set in the case for you, and you can see how much work has gone into this case, because you get one chance to hold accountable an organization like this that seems to have a sense of no accountability. They're huge, they're powerful, and they think that they can do anything back there in Indianapolis the way they want to and not be held accountable. And I guarantee you, when they were writing those emails, they never thought the emails would see the light of day. They never thought Todd McNair would stand up. They probably thought that Todd McNair would take that 1 year show cause penalty, just live it out and then just go coach at some junior college or something, do the best you can. But Todd McNair said, no, you have linked me to one of the worst scandals in the history of college football, and I had nothing to do with it, and I didn't even know it was going on, and I'm a good coach, and I'm sorry. I am taking you to court. And that's what's exposed this whole situation at the NCAA. And you've seen it, and everybody's seen it. So, the first foundation was to understand where their minds were at the time. Their minds were, this was Stacey Osborne from Public Relations at the NCAA. This is September 10 of 2007. All of the publicity that was going on, part of it, a lot of it was about the USC investigation, but a lot of it was about how people were thinking that the NCAA will not be tough on the big programs like USC and Alabama, Washington and Penn State, Texas and Nebraska and all this, okay? I hope I didn't leave your school out. After first looking at the involved parties, the school and the conference, stories began to post with strong skepticism toward the NCAA. Specifically, there is heavy skepticism in the media that the NCAA will follow the allegations with tough sanctions against USC, given its powerhouse status. The sentiment was dormant for a while, but then reemerged with the recent Oklahoma COI findings. Apparently, they were too light on Oklahoma. I guess that's what that means. I don't even remember what that sanction was. But the point is, the mindset was, everybody's saying NCAA is not being tough enough on the big programs. So here's where they were going to draw the line. And it took getting Todd McNair knowing about this, knowing, not just missing red flags, but knowing about it in order to ratchet up those penalties against USC. You know, when I was going to school in the Midwest, before I came to California, in the 60s, there was a great kind of poet, singer, by the name of Bob Dylan. I'll bet you all of you have heard of him. Okay, sorry. Most of you. I'm now 68, and so my time frame is a little different, but I am 68, and I love what I do. Todd McNair would probably still be coaching at age 68, even though we were conservative and said he would coach probably till 65. Remember that conservatism that we used. Anyway, Bob Dylan had a song, and one of the lines in the song was, "You don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows." Wow, does this case scream out for that line? Because as you watch NCAA witness after NCAA witness try to defend themselves against the emails and the change in penalties after Todd McNair was found to have committed unethical conduct, when you watched all of that, and then you saw Todd McNair, all the witnesses you saw in this case, if you had to rank them on a credibility scale, Todd McNair would be up here, and then the others from the NCAA would start about here and go down to zero, like Chef Cooper. Heavy skepticism that the NCAA will follow the allegations with tough sanctions against USC. You can see the mindset that they were in back then. We gotta make this case. This is getting a lot of publicity. What Reggie Bush did was not good, and it shouldn't have happened, and people want us to hit SC for it. So how do we do that? So, November 6, 2007. Remember, this is 7 days after Lloyd Lake filed a lawsuit, right? So he's got a motivation for what he's going to say. Number two, we know that he's an ex-con convicted felon who refused to let USC's lawyers ask him questions. He only would allow the prosecutors to ask him questions. Enforcement staff. Then he puts limitations on when they can send the interview over to USC. Doesn't allow it to go over there. And he produces a photograph with his agenda that we now know sure does look like it's cropped. And who knows what the whole photograph looked like? Nobody. Neither did the NCAA COI. But November 6th, he sits for an interview. And in that interview, you'll recall, well, let me ask you this one too, Lloyd. January 8th, 2006, 1:34 in the morning, there's a call. McNair called to you for 2 minutes, 32 seconds. That is just astounding. That the critical questions that are being asked by Mr. Johannigmeyer, who is not a trained investigator, I mean, were we appalled at the lack of experience of these investigators as investigators? The lack of training that they had? I mean, they have the reputation of universities in their hands. They have the reputations and careers of wonderful people like Todd McNair in their hands, and they give the sloppiest interviews because they're not professionals at it. It's unbelievable to me. So he's got the records in front of him, records that had been produced to the NCAA by Todd McNair, his phone records. Todd had already given an interview at the end of 2006, the first interview. He didn't bring a lawyer with him because he didn't think he had any exposure. Then he turns over all his phone records from his cell phone, his office phone, his home phone. Just, here, take it all, go ahead. And so Mr. Johannigmeyer has the records and he wants to ask the critical question and he gets it wrong. So therefore, of course, Mr. Lake corrects Mr. Johannigmeyer, right? No. He says, yeah, that was like him, meaning Todd McNair, trying to resolve it. And like Reggie's wrong, he should make it right and basically don't implement the school. That's malarkey. Todd McNair did not make the call. The phone records show the call came from Lloyd Lake. And Lloyd Lake isn't going to call Todd McNair because Todd McNair is sitting there in some kind of voodoo trance saying, I really want to talk to Lloyd Lake and get this thing resolved, so let me hope that he calls me and sends out waves where, that's ridiculous. All of this was ridiculous. And you know what else was ridiculous and that they couldn't answer to? It's 1:34 in the morning, a call comes in. If it was really a call, like the call that they wrote about in the report, remember they wrote that Lloyd Lake said that he called McNair, and that he said to McNair about the agency agreement and about the benefits, and he's not going to lose his money, and if they don't do something, he's going to go public. And Todd McNair, if that's what the call was about, just hangs up the phone and goes back to bed, and then makes some personal calls back east in the morning, and then finally calls Reggie at 3 in the afternoon, probably to talk about the agent interviews the next day. That's the act of somebody who's just been told, I'm about to bring down your career and your university if you don't do something about Reggie Bush? Of course not. That's why they couldn't answer that question, and they had all the phone records. And there's no other call after that call that morning. You don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. So, without Todd knowing that those comments had been made, what happened? Todd has asked for a second interview. Fine. Here I am. Ask me whatever you want. He could have had a lawyer. Did he bring a lawyer? No. That speaks volumes. He didn't think he had any exposure to anything because he didn't know anything because he's a football coach. And so watch how it happens with Todd. And watch it again, didn't we? This is January 2005. According to this is Joe Hannigmeyer again. Where was he? This is why this is a recklessly constructed record. According to your telephone records, on Saturday, January 8th, you had a 2-minute 32-second call. And Todd goes, this is on January 8th, 2005? Now, before I talk about the fact that would have been 3 years earlier and the wrong year anyway, let me first talk about their big argument that they just couldn't believe Todd McNair over this convicted felon drug dealer gangbanger whose interview is full of problems, and you had glaring weaknesses in his credibility, as Dennis Thomas said at the hearing, that everybody could hear. But let me ask you this, if their big thing is Todd McNair couldn't remember this call from 2 years earlier, what does Joe Patuto claim she couldn't remember from 2 years earlier? Remember in February of 2008, 2 years before she goes onto the COI committee, she sends an email to Shep Cooper, by the way, not just to a friend, to Shep Cooper, who runs the COI, and says, I saw this guy on TV, this agent, this ex-con agent, and I find it to be quite credible. I also listened to a little bit of his tape from a telephone conversation with Lamar Griffin, Reggie Bush's godfather, stepdad. And then Shep Cooper responds, me too. I thought he was quite believable. I think there's corroboration. She's trying to tell us that when she went onto the COI, she couldn't remember that, which meant an email 2 years earlier. Shep Cooper trying to tell us he didn't remember that from 2 years earlier when he announced to her that she was going to be a substitute on the committee. Neither one of them could remember that 2 years earlier she had said she had a bias going into this thing, that if any one of you on the jury had a bias like that, you know you wouldn't be here. You would have taken yourself off the jury because you believe in the jury system, and that's why you've been here for 3 weeks, and you're going to go beyond Mother's Day, and you know it, and I know it hurts because some of you aren't getting paid, and I know that hurts, I understand. But you would have taken yourself off the jury if you came in knowing you had a bias, and you know it. And she went on, and she was one of the strongest voices in favor of nailing Todd McNair, because she already believed the guy. And then when the tapes came up and they weren't allowed to listen to the tapes, she forgot that 2 years earlier she had listened to part of a tape between Lloyd Lake and Lamar Griffin. She just forgot. And in 2012, when I deposed Dennis Thomas, now the reason I wanted you all to know when that depo was up here, that it was 2012, is because look at all the things he said in 2012 when we put him under oath and asked him questions. Look at all the things he said he couldn't remember. He couldn't remember the details at all of the Sunday deliberations that went for a full day. He couldn't remember the phone call at 7:30 in the evening on March 2nd. Y'all know what I'm talking about. He couldn't remember this and that, and that was just 2 years out. That was in 2012 when I was taking that deposition, and he was telling me all the things he couldn't remember, and that was just 2 years after the stuff we were asking him to remember. And it was major. It was this major investigation. And so they turn around and with a straight face tell you in this courtroom that because Todd McNair could not remember that phone call, that they hung him on a phone call? You know, you don't need a weatherman to know which way they hung him on that phone call and changed the evidence from what it was in the interview to something else because they wanted to ratchet up the penalties against USC. So look at Todd. He's trying, you can see the genuine, look, you all saw the genuineness of this man on the witness stand. He was the best witness in this case by a long shot, whether I was asking him questions or they were asking him questions, and we all know it. And he was so genuine. Here, this man, who was an NFL football player, who ran into linemen that weigh 300 pounds and have a 4.6 40. For those of you that know football, you know what I'm talking about. He had a toughness and a grit. He played with Joe Montana, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. He's a proud man. He was proud of his career. He was growing and climbing and developing. And there were a couple of points on this witness stand where he could not even speak. Because his emotions had overcome him so much. So don't tell me, NCAA, that he doesn't want to coach anymore. You guys took him off the field because you linked him to the worst scandal in the history of college football. One of the worst. One of the worst. But look at how he's trying to figure it out, the way we all do with memory. 2005, that's after the Orange Bowl. Remember, the Orange Bowl was in Miami. They won that game. Reggie Bush wasn't ready to come out yet. There was no Heisman Trophy yet. There were no interviews set the next day in January. Reggie Bush was still a sophomore. The context. You got to give somebody a context if you want an answer. Now look, I'm not saying that if they'd said 2006, he would have suddenly figured it out. We don't know, but he would have had a better chance if they asked him in 2008 about the right date and he could have put it into a context and try to remember. But what he did tell you that rung clear with me is he said, I have no idea what that call was about. It might have been somebody that was trying, including Lloyd Lake, that was trying to get an interview for the next day. We know that Lloyd Lake was trying to start his agency. So 1:30 in the morning is a bizarre time to do it. I fully allow that. But who knows? Was he at a party? Was he in a noisy bar? Was Lloyd Lake intoxicated? Was he on drugs? Was he slurring his speech? We have no idea what was going on because nobody has any idea, including the NCAA, what happened in that conversation. And that conversation is the linchpin. Because a phone call is not a violation of anything. And getting your picture taken with Faison Love and some other people, who knows how many, is not a violation of anything. If you start punishing coaches because they talk to somebody on the phone, then where are we? How many coaches will we have left in America? The question is, what was the information in the call? And they had no evidence of that. So Todd tried to figure it out, and he couldn't remember what it was about. It wasn't until late in 2009 when the notice of allegations come out that he realizes they're talking about a call in 2006. Now, it's 2009, late in 2009. Now he's trying to remember a call 4 years ago. And they couldn't remember, Caputo couldn't remember that she saw that show and sent an email that showed her bias right up front. And one of the things that's really important about her bias is she was the most experienced person on the committee. So if she had bias, she also had power and respect on that committee. And if 4 of them were pretty new, remember that testimony, how 4 of the 8 were pretty new? Well, first of all, what are we getting greenhorns deciding something of this magnitude for USC and for Todd McNair? So, fairly inexperienced, somewhat untrained investigators, half of the committee inexperienced, and then you drop Joe Patuto in the middle of all that. And she's like the gray eminence. I used to say gray, now it's getting to be white. Started happening when I was young. Joe Patuto gets dropped in the middle of that with her bias. What do you think? Eleanor Myers. Is the answer to my question, yes, they were both botched? Yes, yes. And she was, polite enough to say yes, yes, because it was 2 interviews that were botched. And it wasn't a tangential interview. It was the interviews that were at the center of what in the world was said in that phone call that they have hung this man's career on. They were both botched. We don't need her to tell us that. We can see it with our own 2 eyes, just like we can see the emails. Eleanor Myers. This is really important here, as you'll see in a moment. By the way, Myesha Jones, remember Lake's girlfriend? Myesha Jones, she was not there for the phone call, was she? No, she was not. I'll touch on one thing on that now and then something else later. Myesha Jones was not there for the phone call. She was not a witness to whatever was said by Lake in whatever state he was in. She could not say what happened in that phone call. There were only 2. Todd McNair couldn't remember the phone call for the life of him. And you remember Friday afternoon when he was up here and he looked at the NCAA and he said, "You can't make me know Lloyd Lake. You can put me before every public hearing you want to, and I don't know Lloyd Lake. That's not going to change." Could you feel the weight of the yoke that's been on his back all these years, being stuck with being told that he knew somebody he didn't know, and the somebody he didn't know told him something that he was never told? And it was published for the world to see. So you had those 2 people, meaning Lake and McNair. And so you knew that the investigation presented to you had problems from both ends of that phone call, right? Answer, we knew that. I knew that, certainly. And then she says, both botched interviews, right? And she says yes, and she says that was tough. That was tough. It sure was. It was tough because they didn't have the evidence they wanted and that they needed to nail the coach to increase the penalties against SC through the roof. And what really points that out is, remember the standard of proof in the NCAA manual, the rules that they have to follow. The standard of proof. The Committee on Infractions shall base its finding on information presented to it that it determines to be credible, persuasive, and of a kind on which reasonably prudent persons rely in the conduct of serious affairs. In the conduct of serious affairs. who is going to conduct serious affairs and make serious decisions about what happened on a phone call when neither side, one can't remember it at all, and the other one has it backward, upside down, and nonsensical? Who's going to make a serious decision on something like that? Serious decisions. Enter into contracts, decide on the substance of a will, make conclusions about whether somebody should be hired or not. Serious affairs. That's the burden that they had to follow, that the universities imposed on them, and they just ignored it. Oh, let me rephrase. They changed the evidence the way they wrote it so that they could try to argue here on the witness stand that, well, we paraphrased the evidence. And so therefore we met this standard. Boy, that definition of paraphrase is one I've never heard of before. I was an English major in college, and what they did is not a paraphrase. They completely changed the evidence and the meaning of the evidence and flipped it upside down and hit him with an unethical conduct finding and ratcheted the penalty against USC up through the sky. Here's the reality. Infractions, rephrase, enforcement should have recognized right up front that they didn't have the evidence, that they had made such egregious mistakes on this phone call that they never should have filed the charges in the first place against Todd McNair, because the evidence wasn't there and they knew it. The evidence was so not there that the Committee on Infractions and whoever wrote that report, and boy, that was a moving target in this thing. You think they'd be able to tell us that pretty simply? I think I know who did. I think Shep Cooper did. And he wrote it the way he wanted it to be because he and his band of merry Roscoe Howard and Rod Uphoff wanted to raise those sanctions against SC. And they wanted to nail McNair in order to do it. But whatever, the fact that they had to rewrite it tells you that the evidence, the way it actually was not good enough. And enforcement should have known that and should never have put Todd McNair through this in the first place. They should have cut off the head of the snake right there. But they didn't. And we know why. Because they needed to prove that the NCAA is still tough on the powerhouse programs. Oh, okay, your eyes. Okay, some of you are doing your eyes. So, when Dennis Thomas was on the stand, he tried to say, you know, we found McNair not to be credible, and we found Lake to be credible, and we decided to go with Lake over McNair, even though what they went with is different than what Lake said. But remember, I pulled out the transcript from the hearing. I think this is Exhibit 97, Exhibit 450. And here is what he had asked and said to Joe Hanningmeyer during the hearing. So this is Dennis Thomas asking Joe Hanningmeyer about Lake. He says, so I am finding it difficult throughout these allegations. At what point do you believe Lake, and at what point do you don't? At some point you think he has a great deal of veracity, and other points you're saying this just can't be true. So I'm trying to really figure out whether or not he is credible in terms of when he does tell the truth and when he doesn't. That's a COI member saying that in front of all the COI members. So help me with this. I'm just trying to get a sense that you all feel very, very confident about his credibility, but there are glaring, from my perspective, glaring issues in terms of Lake's credibility with the information that is presented in the record. How many times have you heard about the record in this case, in our case? They had a record in their case. And Dennis Thomas dutifully had read everything, and he looked at everything and said, sometimes you can believe it, and sometimes you can't. So they decide to take this phantom phone call this phone call that nobody can tell you what happened in the call and what was said and what kind of knowledge, if any, was given to this good coach. And they take that and they decide to believe that, and they don't even believe it enough because they change it when they write the report. They don't write what really he said. They don't write, Lake said that McNair called him because McNair wanted to resolve the problem with Bush, but the phone record says that Lake called McNair, and, well, wait, we can't say that because that means that the phone record has just proven Lake is wrong, which means he either made it up or he just doesn't remember any more than Todd McNair does. They couldn't write it that way, so they changed it and produced evidence in the report that doesn't even exist in the record. And I heard something the other day that I just went, oh, come on now. That somehow some of these people on the COI had to wait to get the transcript of the hearing, and that turned them around all of a sudden from not having enough evidence and botched interviews and investigation that's fallen short and a recklessly constructed record. All of a sudden they, oh, read it to me over the phone, I'm on my way to Rome. And she listened over the phone, and suddenly, you know, like St. Paul on the road to Damascus, the light shines through. Todd McNair is lying. Well, let me tell you what. If that was true, why did they tell you what it is that she found in the transcript that made this big difference? Why didn't they tell you about all this other evidence that they kept saying? There's all this mountain of evidence that told us that Todd McNair was lying and Lake was telling the truth. Where's that mountain of evidence? They put on almost no witnesses. I put on all of their witnesses. And none of them had a mountain of evidence about how Lake was telling the truth and Todd McNair was lying. And so, you know, you don't need a wedding band, right? This never should have been before the COI, but once it was, the COI should have recognized it for what it was and not ignore what it was and change the evidence in their report. Even Rodney Uphoff, it may be, this is all from the trial transcript here, okay? Which is part of the record. It may be that Lloyd Lake was not reliable, right? Not reliable with respect to some points, may be reliable with respect to others. Against Todd McNair, who you all saw was reliable in everything. Warts and all, as they say. But here, Rod Uphoff, who became one of the ringleaders of taking this committee that couldn't reach a consensus about Todd McNair because the evidence was so recklessly constructed, even one of the ringleaders that was not supposed to be actively involved in these deliberations, even he said, may be reliable with respect to other points, not reliable with respect to some points. That's their star witness. I will pin my star on our star witness, Todd McNair. And then Pete Carroll. Remember this little piece? I mean, I'm not going to go through and chronicle all the places where Lake had it wrong, where he said a phone call did come in, it didn't come in, I'm confused. At one point he goes, I don't even remember that call. Kind of a thing, I don't remember that call. All the stuff he had wrong. But the one that really stuck out was Pete Carroll. He said that Pete Carroll, one of the top college coaches in America, and the head coach of what was a juggernaut called USC Trojans. Pete Carroll was accused in that interview by Lloyd Lake. Lloyd Lake said he was over at Lamar Griffin's house one day after this lease had been set up with Michael Michaels and the family and that whole thing, which Todd McNair didn't know anything about. It's all in San Diego. He didn't know what was going on down there. He says that he heard Pete Carroll on a speakerphone talking with Lamar Griffin about how to come up with a lease that will work in case anybody looks into this. That it would be one whale of a violation for the head coach to be telling the family of a star player or any player how basically to trick the NCAA. So sure, let's go take a look at this, and there was not a phone record anywhere to back that up. Because Lloyd Blake made it up because he had his own purposes. And that's why that photo is cropped, and that's why all of this happened this way. Maybe he was just trying to have USC and Todd McNair bring some more pressure on Reggie Bush to reimburse him. Maybe he had 6 different agendas that we don't even know about. But what I do know is that's an example of where he was dead wrong and made a horrendous accusation that was false. So the Committee on Infractions begins to meet, right? You know about the observers? I don't have to go through all this. I spent a lot of time in my opening statement so that you all would learn and be able to follow those video depots, because I know that that was not easy. The Committee on Infractions that had been having the hearing moved over to its round table, 8 of them around the table, and the observers are over here, and they're just supposed to observe, right? Boy, it was hard to get them to really admit that. I mean, even in the face of the bylaws about Rodney Uphoff as the coordinator of appeals, they tried to argue that he was entitled to do all this, even though it says he cannot be an active participant. That's the way the rules were. There they are. I'd like to call them the 3 Musketeers, but that would be a compliment. And I'm not going to do that. There's a sentence here that's the key to the whole thing. On the 21st, I see some of you nodding, you know what I'm talking about. On the 21st, at the in-person meetings on Sunday after the hearing, this was going Todd McNair's way. They'll never admit that now, but you've seen the emails and you know it's true. And it was going to be too light on SC. And Rodney Uphoff, obviously to Chef Cooper, this email is only going to you. I haven't been able to sleep for 3 nights. 3 nights would take it all the way back to during the hearing. I'll bet you he heard comments at the hearing when he was an observer and couldn't ask questions, couldn't say anything. Like the comment that I put up there from Dennis Thomas about, we can't believe this guy. There's glaring problems with his credibility. He was probably hearing stuff like that and thinking during the hearing and losing sleep Friday night and Saturday night and then Sunday night until Monday morning for 3 nights because he knew that they were not going to do what he wanted them to do. I haven't been able to sleep for 3 nights because I fear that the committee is going to be too lenient on USC on the football violations. He needed a pathway. He needed a method. He needed Todd McNair to make sure that those penalties got ratcheted up. Roscoe and I are both concerned. Roscoe, he's an observer. He's only read the prosecution's stuff, the case summary. He hasn't even read the responses. And he's concerned too. What is his agenda? And then he talks about he wants to write up a report. A report. Now, let me remind you of something. Remember how during the questioning I talked about the fact that if the prosecution wins, the defendant can appeal? But if the defendant wins, there's no appeal by the prosecution, everybody just goes home. Remember that? Remember how they tried to tell you up here that what Rodney Uphoff was doing was right and permitted because he was the coordinator of appeals? And he was allowed to give his thoughts with regard to how he would defend something on appeal? Well, if the committee on Sunday regarding Todd McNair was going in Todd McNair's direction, why did Rodney Uphoff need to weigh in? He could just sit back and listen, and Todd McNair wins, and there's no Todd McNair appeal. He was trying to change what they were doing. I'm just trying to bring you the truth here. And we've worked long and hard on this case. And don't you let them off the hook. He wanted to change what he saw was going on that was making him lose 3 nights of sleep. So did Shep Cooper. I mean, they tried to defend this by saying, well, he didn't have a lot of experience. This was his first time as the coordinator of appeals and blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. That's a legal term, which means and so on and so forth. Okay, it's not a legal term. I'm just kidding. So Rodney Uphoff is one without experience, right? So this goes to Shep Cooper. Did Shep Cooper turn around and say, hey, I've been here for like 20 years. I used to be in enforcement. Now I'm in COI. I know how everything works and everything. Did he turn and say, shut up, you can't say anything? I know you might have feelings, but keep your feelings to yourself. You're an observer, sit on the sidelines and be quiet. You remember what he said. Rod, I'm concerned as well. He might as well have said, Rod, I'm concerned as well. Because, you know, Joe and I saw that show a couple of years ago. And, you know, we believe the ex-con. Might as well have finished the sentence that way. But he was concerned as well that they were going to be too easy on USC. Then he says, as Roscoe said at some point during the Sunday morning deliberations, well, that means Roscoe's talking already in the Sunday morning deliberations. Roscoe Howard, the observer, who knows less than half of the evidence, and all of it is the prosecution's evidence, and he is sitting in the middle of the table where they're conferring and deliberating about what to do? And yet, in the face of this, they get on the witness stand and they testify in deposition under oath that Roscoe didn't say anything. Malarkey. As Roscoe said at some point during the Sunday morning deliberations, individuals like McNair shouldn't be coaching at any level. And to think he is at one of the premier college athletic programs in the country is outrageous. Well, you know what? They got their wish. Shep Cooper didn't think, Shep Cooper said that Roscoe Howard said that Todd McNair shouldn't be coaching at any level, and he's finally fighting back, and he'll be coaching at Village Christian in the fall. And I'll tell you what, that first football game, I'm there. I want to see him back, doing what we saw him doing on that little video clip. I want to be there. Then, look at the next thing. He's a liar. Morally bankrupt criminal, in my view, and a hypocrite of the highest order. And then he talks about criminal background. You know what he was talking about now, right? Somebody on the COI, without telling Todd McNair or Scott Thompson, went outside the record, went on the internet, and found something about dogs from the early 90s, and decided that Todd McNair and Scott Thompson had lied when they answered a question about veracity, anything in your background of a criminal nature that involves veracity. Well, it didn't involve veracity. Veracity is about telling the truth. it was about dogs. And you know he loves dogs. But they didn't tell Todd or Scott Thompson. And so as a result, they were considering something completely outside the record. It could have been easily explained. You don't do it that way. If this is what goes on at the NCAA all the time, your verdict needs to clean this up. Because people's occupations are at stake, and university programs are at stake, and the kids that play in those programs are at stake, and our integrity as a people is at stake. So, fear. Fear seemed to have generated some action by the three observers. So let's look at the rules. Dennis Thomas. So Shep Cooper was not supposed to be advocating a position in the deliberations, correct? That's correct. Mark Emmert even said that because of what he did, Shep Cooper was passed over for the managerial position when they restructured enforcement. Because of what he did in this case, you've got to wonder how many times they've done it in all the cases. Because when you feel absolute power without accountability, you can tend to disregard the rules and bend them even though you're not allowed to. And that's what happened here. And I remember I was shocked one day during the case when I was told that the coordinators of appeals always get involved. Wow. In the face of the bylaws? Wow. Thank goodness for all of us and for all the coaches and schools in America that Todd McNair did not just bite the bullet and live the rest of his life with this negative thing hanging around his neck. Remember, he said the worst part was not the one-year show cause. The worst part was that he was linked with unethical conduct to one of the worst scandals in the history of college football that he had nothing to do with and knew nothing about. Here, Shep Cooper, about the new members. So the answer is it would not be appropriate. That's about not be appropriate for a new member to be part of deliberations, and he said that would not be appropriate. Dennis Thomas. So Roscoe Howard was not supposed to be participating in deliberations, right? And his answer was yes, he was not supposed to be participating in deliberations. Roscoe Howard. You deliberated, correct? Yes, They make the rules for everybody else, but when they have an agenda, they bend them and break them for themselves. That's not good. And then, before you get to that, remember at one point, I think it was, forget which one it was, that said that Paul D., the now passed away chair of the committee, the managing agent for the committee on behalf of the NCAA, you remember that he said that Paul D. had the power to let other people weigh in. Malarkey. Roscoe Howard was described in a letter to Todd McNair and Scott Thompson as being the observer who will not participate. He will be strictly an observer. And in the middle of the whole thing, apparently, Paul D. decides, I'm just going to change that. Because you know that Paul D. wanted to get USC too. That was in the evidence too. He was part of that little group that wanted the very high sanctions against USC. So Brian Halloran, remember him, he said, Mr. D did not have the authority on his own to just decide not to follow the rules, right? That's right. Well, of course not. These are bylaws. These are not suggestions, hopes, and prayers. These are the rules. So Roscoe Howard said, were you told that you were supposed to be deliberating on the McNair case? Yes, he wasn't supposed to be. Who told him? Who told you to deliberate on the McNair case? Paul D. Dennis Thomas, it is totally inappropriate under the rules for Rod Uphoff to be telling Roscoe Howard to chime in with his points because he was not supposed to influence the committee, right? That's correct. Those are the rules. Just like the 12 of you deliberate in private, and if somebody observes, they just observe. It is you all that make the decision. Rodney Uphoff. So you sent a memo to Chef Cooper. You were encouraging Roscoe Howard to try to influence the committee, right? I wanted him to weigh in. Yes, what is weigh in? He's not going to do a prize fight. He's going to weigh into the discussions. You were trying to make it so that Roscoe Howard would influence the committee, correct? Answer, he had strong views and I encouraged him to express his views. So the one guy that's supposed to be staying out of it because the bylaw says he should not be actively involved in either the hearing or the deliberations is getting actively involved, and he's getting Roscoe Howard, who's not supposed to be involved in the deliberations, involved, and it's all under the umbrella of Shep Cooper. So whether Shep Cooper said anything to the committee members or not about what he thinks should be done, he was totally involved in what was going on behind the scenes. So I know you've seen this before, but just for completeness, the duties of the coordinators of appeals. 19.1.1.4, I know you've heard that enough. The coordinators of appeals will be present during institutional hearings before the committee and during following committee deliberations, but will not be active participants in either. If there are going to be rules, you gotta follow them. Unless you have an agenda. And that's what Cooper, Shep Cooper, Rodney Uphoff, Roscoe Howard, Paul Reed, that's what they had. And so did Joe Patillo. And then a most stunning admission on the witness stand right here last week or whatever it was that Uphoff was here. I asked him, you wanted to influence the committee, right? I wanted to help the committee make the right decision. Why wouldn't you just answer my question? You wanted to influence the committee, right? To make the right decision, yes. So is the answer to my question yes? Yes, yes. I wanted to influence the committee to make the right decision. To make the right decision according to Rodney Uphoff? If the committee was going to make a different decision without Rodney Uphoff bringing his influence to bear, it is not Rodney Uphoff's place to become actively involved and to influence the committee. And they'll never admit they were influenced. I mean, one of them said she was the smartest, likes to be the smartest person in the room. She's never going to admit that as a brand new member of the committee, she was not influenced by people like Joe Patugo and Rodney Uphoff and Roscoe Howard. She'll never admit that. None of them will ever admit that they were influenced. But you know, you don't need a weather. To know which way to go. So is it true that the observer is not supposed to argue for a particular position or outcome? Is that true? Yes. He's not supposed to argue that with the committee. That's Dennis Thomas again. These are all questions I asked him back east when I took his depo in 2012, when he couldn't remember a lot of the stuff that had gone on 2 years ago. Actually, to back that up a second, there were admissions I got from him, and he testified the same way on the witness stand. That's what I should say, because he read his depo, and he knew that I got him to admit that that's the way it actually worked, and he knew he'd better say it again, or else I'm going to pull out that depo and read it back to him and say, this is what you said under oath back in 2012, and so that's what you're seeing here is what he said about these rules. Rodney Uphoff. I've covered this. This is about the idea that if they were going to let Todd McNair go, there's no appeal, so there's no reason for Rodney Uphoff to say, here's how I will defend this on appeal. He was trying to change where they were headed on Todd McNair. And you know why they were headed there, because Todd McNair is quite credible. And this other guy wouldn't even let anybody cross-examine him, and he has a terrible history, and he's got a confused, choppy interview with things backward and upside down, with accusations of Pete Carroll and all kinds of stuff, glaring inconsistencies in his credibility, and they're comparing the two of them. Of course they were heading in Todd McNair's favor. Why would they turn around and get on the witness stand and say he was not credible, he was lying like crazy to us? Because they wanted to get higher penalties against USC. So it all turned around because they were influenced, whether they want to say it or not. You know, the best kind of influence is the subtle kind where you don't realize you're being influenced. So Rodney Uphoff, Shep, here is my draft. I'm just going to quickly go through these emails that y'all have seen already. Here is my draft. Then, this is Roscoe Howard, from Roscoe Howard. No, this was Rodney Uphoff to Roscoe Howard. I am very bothered about this case, and no Shep is as well, the three of them. They're all bothered about the case. If they are, keep it to yourself. We need to regain the momentum. These are three people that by the rules and the bylaws are not supposed to be involved. This is on February 23, 2 days after the in-person all-day meeting in Tempe. And the three of them need to regain the momentum. It is not their momentum to regain. It's the 8 people on the committee. And if they felt they needed to gain the momentum, regain the momentum, what do you think that means? It must mean that momentum was headed in favor of Todd McNair. Otherwise, why would they need to regain it? Common sense. Don't leave it at the courthouse door. Same day, the 23rd. Rod, your summary is excellent. I would share it with the committee. This is Roscoe Howard to Rodney Uphoff. He has no place telling Roscoe Howard I'd share it with the committee. The other point to make is that McNair should have all inferences negatively inferred against him. Why? What has McNair done wrong? In literature, it's called a kangaroo court. And Todd McNair was hung by that kind of stuff. Rodney Uphoff says to Roscoe Howard, I think it may work best for you to chime in with your points after I send out the memo. Rod Uphoff to Shep Cooper, my thought is to send it out to get the conversation going. And hopefully Paul, Roscoe, and others will weigh in. That Paul right there tells you that Paul D was part of this. That's why he broke the rules and said to Uphoff and Howard, you guys can speak up. There wasn't enough speaking up in the room against Todd McNair. He needed support. Okay, here's the second key to the case. I told you the first one is that sentence that says, I haven't been able to sleep for 3 nights because I fear that the committee will be too lenient on USC on the football violations. That's the first key. Here's the next one. February 24, 2 days, 3 days after the Sunday meeting. This is after that exchange of emails we just looked at, okay? And so what happens is, February 24, a summary of where the committee is, and they had found just about all of the violations against USC for football. And they deferred Todd McNair. And you may remember this page, but this was the list of proposed penalties at that point, before they found against McNair. And then once they find against McNair, it all changes. But before they find against McNair, it's a loss of 6 football scholarships over 2 years and a loss of 1 postseason bowl. But Uphoff and Paul Dean and Cooper and Patuto and Howard were not happy with that. That was not a big enough penalty for USC for what had gone on here. And they were getting pressure in the press about coming back with something big against these big powerhouse institutions like USC, Florida, Florida State, and all these schools, Oklahoma, whoever. This tells you where they were at. And it's because of the proposed penalties that it was driving Uphoff and the crew through the roof. And that's why they had the fight over McNair. Because if they could get the coach that was employed by the university in a position where he knew and didn't report it, explosive penalties. And that's what happened. Rod Uphoff's memo. This is not just a summary of the evidence. Look at some of the comments he makes. He's not on the committee as a voting member. But he's saying we also need to send USC and the membership a serious message about agents in football and about looking the other way when there are red flags that ought to be closely scrutinized. He's not summarizing evidence for them. He's taking a stout position as to what the committee should do. I also find it especially disturbing that the institution can sit idly by and allow Todd McNair to attempt to create a false impression regarding his character and record. His record, that's the Dogs. And they didn't even know that that was going on behind closed doors, that this was even an issue. And Rod Uphoff has it right there in his memo. To create a false impression regarding his character and record and then fail to take any action to alert the committee to his actual situation. Alert the committee to what? That in the early 90s he had a problem when he was trying to breed some dogs and he was in Kansas City and he was in training and there was a terrible storm back there and they had a problem with the dogs and he owned up to it and he paid his fine and he moved on. Nothing about veracity. What's he supposed to be revealing to the committee? No, it's the committee that was supposed to be revealing to him that they had gone off record and found information that they were considering, even though they say they didn't consider it. Because then the next thing, he refers to McNair's two prior cases of cruelty to animals, and that was nowhere in the record. Rod Uphoff wasn't talking about the appeal. He was trying to influence the committee, and he did. So, and here's where, on the witness stand, Rod Uphoff had to admit, because he now looked at what the question had been asked about veracity, and said, Mr. McNair certainly answered it truthfully. But back then, he was using it against McNair, because he had an agenda. Then he goes on to talk about McNair had knowledge, at least as of January 8th, that Bush had taken money and therefore played when he was ineligible. I think he was well aware before then, based on Lake and the circumstantial evidence that supports Lake. He had a duty to report that information. His failure to do so was wrong and he should be held accountable. He's taking a position. He's telling the committee how he thinks they should vote. He's not summarizing the evidence for them. He's trying to turn the ship around in the water that was heading into port for Todd McNair. I'm not going to spell out all of the reasons that I think USC has dropped the ball. Well, it is not your place, Mr. Uphoff, because you are not supposed to be actively involved in making this decision. Stop trying to persuade people and look at what happened as a result. And then USC has responded to its problems by bringing in Lane Kiffin. They need a wake-up call that doing the things the wrong way will have serious consequences. This is still Rod Uphoff in that memo that they say is just a nice summary of the evidence. He's angry at USC for bringing in Lane Kiffin because Lane Kiffin had some rumors about him in Tennessee, and that's it. He never had an NCAA enforcement proceeding. He never had any kind of unethical conduct finding. He never had a show cause penalty. He never had any of that. He's telling the committee they need a wake-up call. It's not your place, Mr. Uphaw. Look at the bylaws, follow the rules, the way we do when we play sports. And if bringing in Lane Kiffin is going to be enough to raise the eyebrows of the NCAA, imagine a school that hired Todd McNair. No school is going to want to bring into its fold as a coach someone that had been through one of the most high-publicized infractions cases in the history of college football that went on for 5 years. No school, not even his alma mater, where he was a football hero, would take him in. It's as if this had happened to Joe Montana, who played for Notre Dame and was a huge hero at Notre Dame. And if we had an unethical conduct finding against him, Notre Dame wouldn't hire him because they don't want the light shown on them. No program is going to want NCAA scrutiny focused on them because they bring in somebody that the NCAA announced to the world was a liar and knew what was going on and didn't report it. Governor Myers, though, fighting back appropriately. I think we would need to be pretty confident that we knew the content of the January 8th call. Nobody's confident of what happened in that call. Not even Lake isn't in his interview is confident of what happened in that call. He's got it backward and upside down with motivations that don't even apply. Nobody knows what happened in that call. And she said I would need to be pretty confident that we knew the content of the call, and then she gets on the witness stand and says, well, we decided. Trust us, we're the NCAA. And we are very smart. And we look back at the transcript and figured it out somehow over the phone when I was waiting to board a plane to go. I had them read it to me. And then, you know, they don't like the emails because she also says, on the other side, we have a botched interview in which McNair did not have a good opportunity to explain the call since the date the staff questioned him about was wrong, 2005 instead of 2006. Then Roscoe Howard weighs in with his 4.5-page rant. My point is that as a committee, I feel we keep looking at these events. You are an observer. Specifically as to Todd McNair, concerns expressed in the March 1st email, McNair should have all inferences negatively inferred against him. Why? Then he makes an admission that's just remarkable. Before he knew it would ever show up in a court of law. We have the staff, its general counsel, and USC all insisting we only operate in a world and with a record that has been recklessly constructed. Well, number one, yes, the rules say you operate with the record. Everybody's insisting we operate with a record. What does he want to do, go out of the record? They already did with regard to the dogs. You want to go out of it some more? And then he is saying the reason we got to go outside the record is because the record is recklessly constructed. That goes back to the fact that these charges should never have been brought in the first place. Then he says, I don't think this committee should be chained to a staff that has seemed to have fallen short with this investigation. I don't like the word short, but this staff fell woefully short with this investigation, and even he knew it. And then he says, interestingly, on March 2, this is the day of the 7:30 p.m. conference call, I know not everyone agrees with me, and I'm hoping that at least someone does. What does that tell you about where the committee was at that point? He wouldn't be saying, I know not everyone agrees with me. And a lot of people were agreeing with me. I'm hoping at least someone does. I'll tell you who did. Rod Uphaw, Paul Lee, Joe Patuto, and Shep Cooper. And then Eleanor Myers, March 2, before the 7:30 phone call, she said, I share your outrage, Roscoe, in your email. I am just having trouble getting there on the record. But we all know why. The record was backward, upside down, and confused. Based on the record, nobody is saying what actually happened in that phone call because they don't know. Whoa, what did I do?
I don't know, but let's take a break. So